why don't we break down the top 10 matchups this year within the conference? And one of the qualifiers here, biggest impact that we think these games will have on the college football playoff.
Yes.
Not, traditional rivalries or things like that, but the in-conference games in the college football season that will have the biggest impact towards the end of the year when we're trying to select those 4 teams to make the college football playoff. You and I put together a top 10
Yes.
to represent Crane and Company as a whole here.
Yes.
Do we have that list? Please bring it up. Number 1 on that list is LSU at Alabama, November 4.
It's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. I think it really depends on Alabama will have Texas before that. LSU will have Florida State before that. This game's at Alabama, correct?
So I have Alabama's schedule here.
Okay.
Remember, they're going to have Texas at home before this.
Correct.
They're going to have Ole Miss. They're going to go on the road to Mississippi State, on the road to Texas A&M as well. Arkansas at home and Tennessee at home before they get LSU at home. So we're already going to know a lot about who's playing quarterback. Is that Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, all that kind of stuff long before we get to LSU at home. But remember, this game was deciding the SEC West a season ago.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if it decides the SEC West again this
That's
year.
why it's at the top of our list.
I mean, if anything, I think LSU's right now favorited odds-wise to win the West, but Alabama's favored to win this game. If you go look at the odds right now, Alabama has a 76% chance to win this game.
76% chance.
76%.
Already.
Already.
Here we sit here, July 25, 76% chance to win this game.
Absolutely.
That's the Nick Saban effect.
Well, yeah, it's the Nick Saban effect. It's a Bryant Denny effect, right? It's going to be a lot. It's a lot different walking in that game on Bryant Denny on a Saturday than is walking into Death Valley at LSU. That's how much home field advantage matters. But at the end of the day, how healthy is LSU going to be walking in this game? How healthy is Jane Daniels? What's going to be the situation with the quarterback room in Alabama? Now, by the time this game comes out, all this will be played out already. I mean, Alabama, you're going to have to walk through a couple good teams before you even get here. I'm more interested to see this Tennessee game and Joe Milton, because the Tennessee game's at Bama. I mean, you go to A&M, to Mississippi State. I mean, none of these games are going to be walking the park. And you got Quinn Ewers in the boys' week, too. So the thing about it is, Alabama with the schedule, obviously it's every year, but you're going to have to earn almost every win. And you look at LSU, you start off the year, buddy.
Yeah.
You start off the year with the playoff contending right now, my favorite to win the ACC in Florida State. So, I mean, this game is you can go ahead and chalk it up to almost the same thing. This game is going to decide whether who's going to the West.
And that game you're talking about, Florida State, LSU, that topped our top 10 yesterday.
Yeah, on
non-conference games. And so before they face Alabama, they're going to have Florida State, like you said, and Mississippi State, Arkansas, Ole Miss. They're going to play Auburn. So by that time, do you think, what are the chances both of these teams are unbeaten by the time we get around to November 4th?
I think the chances are pretty good, to be honest. I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Alabama and LSU are both unbeaten.
Yeah.
By the time they get to that.
So, I mean, if you're LSU, you get past Florida State. I mean, who you really worried about? I would say at Ole Miss. I'd say you're worried about that game. You're worried about at Ole Miss. I'm not too worried about at Missouri. Auburn at home. Auburn rarely beats LSU on the road. They rarely ever do that. I mean, Army, that's gonna suck. But Mississippi State, we'll see. Mississippi State's kind of in a transition year after Coach Leach passed. I mean, RIP, we love Coach Leach. But then you go look at Alabama. I mean, you have Texas week 2. I mean, you get past Texas. I mean, A&M, we don't know who A&M's going to be. No one knows who A&M's going to be when we walk into the year. They could be phenomenal or they could be mediocre, right? There's usually no in between with A&M. All right, then you go Tennessee. Now, do you believe in Joe Milton?
I believe he's real.
But do you believe that he's going to be the guy for Tennessee? Is he going to? Because Jordan Rodgers just came out and said he's the most talented quarterback in the SEC.
Most talented?
Yeah.
What is that like?
That's
like physically
verbatim.
Gifted?
Like most talented quarterback in the SEC.
All right.
So I don't believe in that at all. So if you're Alabama right now, you get past A&M, you have Ole Miss at home, you get past Texas week 2. I mean, you're not. The biggest game is going to be Tennessee at home, and I like Alabama in that game from a roster standpoint, especially at home. It's at Tennessee; it's a lot different. But I don't think Joe Milton is going to be slinging the pill around like old Hendon was last year, especially pushing the ball down the field. And I think Alabama's defense is going to be a different team this year from a discipline standpoint.
Well, I would say that I don't know if either of these teams will come into that game unbeaten, but if both are undefeated on November 4th for LSU at Alabama, That's going to be a spectacle, and that will certainly decide the SEC West.
100%.
It's not already a stretch to say that that's going to be the game that will decide that division. I want to move on to number 2 here, which is Michigan and Ohio, which is great. And one of the things, the top 4 on this list are all in conferences, the SEC and the Big Ten, that still have divisions, which I think is an important distinction to make, because they're, down this list, we're going to get into some huge conference matchups, but there will always be an ability now in the ACC and the Pac-12 and even the Big 12 for those teams to rematch in the conference championship, which you're not going to have with some of these division matchups like we talked about with LSU and Alabama. One of those teams is going to have to, one of those teams in the West is going to have to go compete in the conference championship against a team in the East. Same here with the Big Ten East, which is Michigan and the Buckeyes, November 25th, which it's great as a former Michigan football player for this game to actually mean something on the national landscape again.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it always means something to me every year because, you want to beat the Buckeyes. It means something to their fan base. But now that Michigan has actually made this a competitive rivalry again for the past 2 seasons, that's exciting to see, and it's been deciding that division, which I told you, first time we ever met, the question has always been, when's Michigan going to beat these guys again?
Yeah.
Well, until they do, they can't win that side of the conference, and they can't win the conference outright or make the college football playoff. That's happened for the past 2 times. They're going to meet up November 25th. Yeah, last year was the first undefeated matchup since my freshman year in 2006. Do you think we'll get another installment of that?
I do think so. The biggest worry, if you're Ohio State, you go to Notre Dame week 4, right? Then you have Penn State. Other than that, we'll see with Wisconsin at Luke Fickell. Obviously going to be better. I think they're going to be more athletic. I'm interested to see what they look like. But if you go look at Ohio State, then you go look at Michigan. Who are you really worried about if you're Michigan and you're walking in this game?
At Penn State.
You're at Penn State.
Michigan State's a rivalry game still.
It's true, but you're so much more talented than Michigan State.
You're so much. That's what I heard. That's what I heard about Michigan and TCU last year.
Y'all will slaughter Michigan.
So you say they always find a way.
I can
play us
almost
close.
Look. At the end of the day, I don't know what the spread's going to be, but I guarantee it's probably going to be Michigan double digits. I can probably put the rent on that, and I guarantee Michigan will cover that game. Between the tackles, y'all will murder Michigan State.
Look, I like everything you're saying.
You can run the ball. Look, I get it deep down. You don't want to admit it. Right? You want to walk in. You never know.
I've seen too many things, man.
You never know.
I have seen the crazy. Look, 2016, I saw Michigan lead for the entire game. Michigan State didn't have the lead the entire regulation. The clock already struck 0 before that punt was blocked, and they took it back for the win. I've seen the craziest things, man.
Well, but you always have to feel good if you're only bringing up 2016. Right? What was the score last year? 30-0, 30-7?
It was a good game.
And it could have been worse.
Good ball game.
Y'all will run through Michigan State. Obviously, you're worried about Penn State, but we got to see how Aller is, their quarterback, who's like 9'7", has a great arm.
He's going to be good.
He's going to be good, but I feel like, he's kind of almost in the same boat as Joe Milton. His touch, we'll see. I think it's better than Joe Milton.
But we haven't seen him yet, though.
Yeah,
we've seen Joe Milton. This is, like I said yesterday, this is the 3rd time Joe Milton has started.
Yeah, I know, but we saw Joe Milton in a bowl game where nobody was playing.
Yeah, but that's true, but it's still better to throw 3 touchdowns and no picks than to go the other way around.
100%.
Look, like I said, if he has made the progression in the offseason that, a quarterback is capable of making, especially in a Josh Heupel system, then he's going to be a good football player, which brings us to number 3 here, Georgia at Tennessee. For the same reason, both teams are on the same side of the SEC in the East here. And if Joe Milton is able to progress and give, any sort of performance like Hendon Hooker was a season ago, then to me, that's the only shot really a team has at beating Georgia unless they have their own issues at quarterback.
Yeah. I don't think, you look at the schedule right now, you still have Bama on the road, Kentucky on the road. You have, Florida week 3. You have South Carolina week 5, which would be an interesting game. I don't think Tennessee at this point, with the roster that Georgia has, is really going to be able to step up and even make this a game. I really don't. I think Georgia will just walk through this game.
So didn't you say yesterday you pulled up the odds for Georgia's schedule that the odds for the Tennessee game are the only ones in single digits right now?
Yeah, I think it was minus. I think I started -8, -9.5.
Something like that.
But I think that'll change. later in the season when the game gets there. I think this will end up being minus 13.5.
Again, what if Georgia comes in and they have spotty quarterback play? I mean, Stetson Bennett's not there anymore.
Yeah, that is true, but you can have spotty quarterback play, but if your roster is so phenomenal everywhere else, it's going to cover that up. I mean, Tennessee's roster is not even close. Not even close to the roster Georgia has, especially up front, O-line, D-line in the box, secondary. Georgia's stacked almost every position. Almost every position other than quarterback because we really don't know yet. We really hadn't seen it enough sample size to know. But I know, in my opinion, I don't think Joe Milton is going to be the starter through Tennessee's year. I think Joe Milton will end up getting replaced. So I don't think Joe Milton has the touch or the accuracy to make it through the SEC into what Heupel wants to do as an offense. I don't think Joe Milton's going to be that guy. I don't think that's a crazy take either. I really don't. I think Joe Milton will make mistakes early. I don't think their backup was the true freshman? I'd have to go look at their backup, but I don't think Joe's going to be the guy. And I don't think Tennessee is going to have enough against Georgia. I mean, hell. I mean, even in last year, I mean, you can say, well, obviously you have Stetson Bennett, but I mean, last year when Tennessee was, at their peak, I mean, you got beat 28-13.
Now, that game was between the hedges. This one's going to be at Neyland, which makes it a little bit more interesting. But again, that's one of the top divisional matchups we have. Last one that's in the same division here is Penn State going to Columbus to play the Buckeyes. This is October 21st. Why this game is a little bit more interesting to me than Michigan going to Penn State, like we just talked about, is because this one's earlier in the season, and here's Penn State's schedule before they go play the Buckeyes. You got West Virginia, Delaware, Illinois, Iowa, Northwestern, and UMass. Now, look, the Penn State-West Virginia matchup is going to be a lot of fun. Going and playing at Illinois, I think, could be a good game. Let's see what Cade McNamara is going to bring to this new Iowa offense. But it's not unrealistic to think that Penn State could potentially walk into the Horseshoe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-0. Right, 6-0. Oh. So depending on how they go play the Buckeyes, I think is going to tell you a lot about how the Big Ten East is going to play out because they're not going to get Michigan until November 11.
Yeah.
And if they are able to go steal a win on the road, and that's obviously before the Wolverines and the Buckeyes would play, that's going to really throw a wrench in how the Big Ten East plays out.
Oh, 100%. It's amazing how much it's going to come, not even just all the teams around college football, how much it's going to come down to quarterback play. Mm-hmm. Like, we talk about these top-tier teams, and we just realistically talk about quarterback play. How's Drew Aller going to play? Especially you go against the Ohio State team. I mean, you go back, I think Sean Clifford had a hell of a game against Ohio State last year. I mean, threw 350-plus yards. I mean, had a hell of a game, and you still lost by double digits. I mean, Ohio State, and you're on the road this time. The game was at Penn State last year. Penn State, it's not like Penn State doesn't have the athletes. So I'm really interested to see what Penn State's defense looks like this year because they're a hard-nosed group. They always are. But Ohio State's just so talented from the center all the way out to the receiver position. They're so hard to stop. But we'll see how Ohio State quarterback play is at the end of the day. But I do think that this is a race between Ohio State and Michigan like it is every year.
Yeah, and that's interesting. In that top four there, we have an SEC West matchup, an SEC East matchup, and then two out of the Big Ten East. And one interesting point, again, we're talking about conference matchups here that will have the biggest impact on the college football playoff. Well, think about it last year. We're talking about Wolverines and the Buckeyes playing. Both those teams ended up making the college football playoff last year. So it's still possible for two of these teams from the same division to make the college football playoff, even though I just don't think we're going to see that again this year with how competitive the rest of the country is going to be, which brings us up to number 5, and this is Clemson at Florida State. I already can't wait for this football game. And again, we're already going to know a lot about Florida State with how they open up against LSU. And like I said, ACC scrap divisions now, so you're not going to have any more of this what were their divisions? The Atlantic and the Coastal something like that. So these two teams could potentially play again in the conference championship. But September 23rd, Florida State goes on the road to Clemson. That's going to be one of the big indicators for the college football playoff.
Yeah, it's going to be huge. And, I mean, you go to Clemson, I'm really interested to see what Clemson looks like this year. Because the one thing we haven't seen from Clemson, I'm not used to seeing from Clemson, is their skill position being down. Right? Usually, the closest thing to SEC guys when you turn on a tape on Saturday and you go look at Clemson is the guys they have out wide. Mm-hmm. Clemson's always going to be good on defense. Up front, Clemson's always phenomenal. Hell, I think they just put 3 guys in the league last year. They're just absolute monsters up front. We'll see with Cade Klubnik. I mean, we got a little taste of him. I think he's going to be okay. I think he's going to progress. But I'm more interested to see what they look like from a skill position-wise, because usually Clemson is top tier. We know what Florida State is. We know what Florida State is with that monster they have running out there. He's like 6'7". I mean, J. Trav at quarterback, one of the most underrated running backs in the nation. They're going to be pretty good up front, and Florida State always has some cats running on defense. If they stay disciplined, I'm interested to see what their secondary looks like. But this could be huge for the college football playoff, because if you walk in and Florida State, if Florida State loses to LSU, how much does that hurt their chance to make the college football playoff?
If
Florida State loses to LSU.
It hurts their chances more, I think, than if LSU loses to Florida State.
Yeah.
Because like I was telling you last week, if LSU loses at Florida State in week 1 and they still go and win the SEC West like they did last year and then win the SEC outright, they're going to make the college football playoff.
Yeah.
Now, Florida State could do the same thing if Florida State loses to LSU and then runs the table and is unbeaten. Which is actually more likely than LSU doing that. I just think an SEC team who wins the conference can get in with 2 losses before any other school in the country can make the college football playoff with 2 losses and win their conference.
How many undefeated teams do you think are going to be in the playoff this year?
I'll say 2.
Michigan?
I'm hoping so. And if not, one of the other teams from the Big Ten East. But yes, let's say Michigan, undefeated, college football playoff. And then possibly Georgia.
Yeah.
Honestly. I mean, again, I don't know what kind,
no undefeated team
it could
in
be
the Pac-12?
Huh?
You don't think anybody's going to run the table in the Pac-12?
No,
Conference is deep.
Well, that gets to where we're going next. USC, Utah. Number 6 on the list. I mean, there's so many great matchups in here in the Pac-12 that's like, is one of these teams, if one of them's going to do it, if one of them goes unbeaten, I'll say it's USC.
Yeah.
But USC versus Utah, this game, let me pull their schedule up real quick. Because this game has proven to decide, who goes to the Pac-12 championship out in the West, too.
Yeah, the game's at USC.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so hard for me not to take Utah in this game.
And this is the week.
I have USC winning the Pac-12.
This is the week after you go to Notre Dame.
Oh, it's the week right after?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, who does Utah have the week before this game? Let me look at the schedule.
Again, we've been talking about how USC's schedule is so back heavy. So it's San Jose State, Nevada, Stanford, Arizona State, Colorado, Arizona, then on the road to Notre Dame. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They could walk into South Bend 6-0. I'm talking about USC here.
Mm-hmm.
If they go on the road and win that, you could play Utah at home at 7-0. Then you get Cal on the road. But look how back heavy it is for USC. You have Washington at Oregon, and then a rivalry game with Chip Kelly and UCLA, all back to back to back, and then you'd have the conference championship.
You feel like there's a couple slip-ups in there, right? You got to feel like that, right? And you even look at Utah's schedule. I mean, you got Florida week 1, which you should win that game. You got Baylor week 2, which is not going to be an easy game to win. That's going to be a physical football game. You got UCLA week 4 at home. That's going to be an interesting game to watch. Then you go to Oregon State.
This is Utah's schedule.
Yeah. This is Utah. Then you go to Oregon State. You do have Cal the week before USC. That'll be the type of game where you can maybe sit some guys for a little bit in the second half and get a little bit healthy. But then you get USC, Oregon back-to-back, Arizona State. Then you go to Washington. The Pac-12 this year is just a tough slate. Mm-hmm. It's a tough slate. I don't think there's going to be an undefeated team coming out of the Pac-12. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if the conference winner's a 2-loss team. I wouldn't be surprised by that. It's just the absolute. It's going to be a triage tent of teams that's trying to make their race at the end. I think it's going to come to down maybe who's the healthiest at the end of the year.
All right, let's go to the Big 12 now. Oklahoma State, Bedlam, one of the greatest rivalries in college football. Now, of all these that we listed, this one may have the least impact on the college football playoff, but I think it's still warranted being on this list just because with Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 and going to the SEC, we've heard Mike Gundy, how upset he is that this rivalry is not going to continue. This could be the last installment that we see of Bedlam. I mean, I might be 50 before we see this game again.
I know.
And this is going to be, I think this is at Oklahoma. We'll pull that up real quick.
Okay. I think it might, I think he might be either that or at Oak State. I'm telling you right now, people need to stop sleeping on Oklahoma. Dylan Gabriel, problem, an absolute problem. And their defense.
Oh, it is at Oklahoma State.
Yeah, it's at
November
Oklahoma State.
4th.
Their defense is going to be a lot better than they were last year. I mean, that's what Venables is known for. That's what he does. He breathes and eats and sleeps defense. So it's not even going to be close to what you saw last year, I believe. They've got some more depth on the roster, and I think Oklahoma might be a surprise pick to win the Big 12.
Okay.
I really do, because I still think of Oklahoma in my head as that top-tier football team.
Mm-hmm.
Even with Lincoln gone. Even when Lincoln gone, their offense put up numbers last year. I mean, if Dylan stays healthy and their defense can limit yardage and limit touchdowns, I have to go look and see how much points they gave up the game, but it wasn't great. I mean, they gave up 33 points a game, which is terrible, which you don't see from Brett Venables' defense. But I'm telling you right now, quit sleeping on Oklahoma, because they're going to surprise a lot of people. They're sitting to some beat-down dog that you keep in the back that's just scared every time you go in there. This is Oklahoma and the Brent Venables coach team. And if anything, the rat poison that gets stacked on top of these guys that they're hearing week in and week out. Week in and week out. Well, Oklahoma's not the same team. Oklahoma's not back. I'm telling you right now, you better watch out for these guys, because they'll slip up and run through it.
So Oklahoma was 6-7 a season ago, losing 4 of their last 5. And all of those 4 losses were by 3 points. They lost 38-35 to Baylor. They lost 23-20 to West Virginia. They lost 51-48 in overtime to Texas Tech. And then they lost 35-32 to Florida State in the bowl game. You know, and they lost earlier in the season by 1 score to Kansas State. So really it's the blowout loss to TCU, who ended up having, you know, a generational type season. 55-24. And then obviously the 49-0 to Texas is what still stands out in my mind. You can't lose 49-0 to your biggest rival like that.
No, you can't. And you got to think that's plastered all over that locker.
And but that defense was banged up like you were talking about. I mean,
there's no way Oklahoma's defense is either going to be remotely close to what you saw last year.
Okay.
There's no way.
Yeah, that's realistic. With Brent Venables?
Yeah, there's no way. It just doesn't add up
but
if it is.
This game going to be at Oklahoma State now, with Oklahoma leaving the conference?
It's going to be
rowdy.
It's going to be a battle.
It's going to be rowdy. All right, let's stay in the Big 12. Let's go Texas versus Kansas State. All right? This is November 4th as well. The reason that I thought this one might be more interesting than even, say, having Texas and Oklahoma, those teams are going to continue to play, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, I don't know if Oklahoma is going to return to form this season, but Kansas State is the defending champs in the Big 12.
100%.
And it's not unrealistic that they could win the conference again. So Texas hosting Kansas State on November 4th, I think, is one of the top 10 matchups that we're going to see.
I mean, you got to think so. I mean, if you're Kansas State, you return Will Howard. Who, I mean, even with that loss to Alabama, had a phenomenal year. The kid looked great. You lose little Deuce
Vaughn.
Deuce.
Yeah.
He's a Cowboy now, but still, Kansas State identity is so just implanted in who they are. You know exactly what you're gonna get out of Kansas State. Kansas State is going to play phenomenal line of scrimmage defense for sure, and they're gonna challenge you between the ends from running the ball standpoint. And don't think Will Howard's a big kid and has an absolute cannon. He's 6'5", 250 pounds.
Yeah.
Right? And he's only gotten what? He's only gotten better.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas State right now, do you think people are talking about Kansas State enough? Who do you think they're talking about more right now? Kansas State or Oklahoma?
Probably Oklahoma, just from a brand perspective, even though I think both of them are getting overshadowed right now by Texas and the roster that Texas returns. And look, we're going to get to our conference predictions when we get into August and get into fall camp, but I'm starting to lean more and more towards Kansas State repeating, which I don't think they've done in the history of the program. I don't think they've won back-to-back championships. I'm still catching a lot of heck from Kansas State fans for my prediction last season, but think about it. They had back-to-back seasons of losing records within the conference. Right? You bring in Adrian Martinez from Nebraska, who I had seen play a lot of football, was not that impressed, but I think the way that he was able to break out at Kansas State just spoke more to what the dysfunctional situation was with Scott Frost at Nebraska more than his ability to play, because he lit Oklahoma up. And this is before Will Howard even took the field and showed us what he was capable of. Yeah. Adrian Martinez was still balling out and playing good football last season. Will Howard comes in, picks up the mantle. That's what gave me the confidence to pick them against TCU in the conference championship, which they won, I think it's not only realistic that they could go back-to-back, but that this game against Texas here could be one of the deciding factors on November 4th.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, 100%.
Back to the Pac-12 here for the next one. This is Oregon at Washington. Again, when you talk about Oregon at Washington and USC, Utah, I think those 4 teams, you could almost flip a coin and say any of those have a great opportunity to win the conference and make the college football playoff. So Oregon at Washington, that's October 14th. So we'll actually get that game a week before we get Southern Cal and Utah. You've been big on this Oregon-Washington game for a while.
It's going to be huge. One of the two, I mean, in my opinion, 2 phenomenal quarterbacks.
Bo Nix.
2 older guys. Michael Penix Jr. It's not like watching a lefty play. This is the most even matchup to me, almost like that I look at right now. This is a 50-50 game to me. If anything, I would pick Oregon because I'm a Bo Nix guy, right? I mean, he's focused, he's having fun. He might be a dark horse for Heisman. But, I mean, right now, you look at it, I think it's going to come down to a lot of what defense can make a play late. I feel like this will be one of those games. It's going to be the last drive, and that's the only thing that scares me about Oregon. All right, we saw it last year. They can fall apart late in games, but you from a Dan Lanning coach team, a leader at quarterback. You do lose a couple linemen to the NFL, but I think they're replacing them pretty well. They're going to be okay. But I do think the thing about Oregon, God, that Texas Tech Week 2 game scares the hell out of me. If I'm Oregon, it scares the hell. It's on the road too. It scares the hell out of me. Other than that, if you can win that Texas Tech game, you got to think you're walking in this game. 5-0, right? You're walking to Washington. Look at Washington's schedule real quick. Let's see who you're going to have before that. Because other than that, you have Hawaii. Washington, Boise State Week 1. What's your
thoughts?
For Washington? Yeah.
Ooh.
Boise State Week 1. That game's at home. You have Tulsa Week 2. We'll see. You got Michigan State.
Yeah, and they go on the road.
They go on the road
to East Lansing. And again, we've talked about some of the struggles that Mel Tucker's dealing with at Michigan State. But I'm just telling you, a Washington team from the West Coast, it's not going to be just a walk in the park to go.
That travel's tough.
Yeah, playing East Lansing. But so that's not an awesome non-conference schedule for Washington.
It's not.
In terms of having to get through it. But if you win those football games, then all of a sudden it becomes great because it's good for the strength of schedule and it's going to look good in the College Football Playoff Committee's eyes.
100%.
And I think the biggest thing is Michael Penix Jr. staying healthy and some of those wide receivers they have out there, big-time football players. So this brings us to number 10. This is the top 10 conference games for the 2023 college football season that will have the biggest impact on the College Football Playoff. Alabama at Texas A&M. Okay, one more here from the SEC West. Now, you have talked a lot about Texas A&M. We don't know what they're going to be. Is this going to be another losing season? Are they going to be just slightly above mid? But the reason this made the list is because this will be the first installment of Alabama going to Texas A&M since we saw the Aggies beat the Crimson Tide out there 2 seasons ago. We had all sorts of Jimbo Fisher, Nick Saban back and forth, some trash talk. It's never going to not be an interesting football matchup when these two teams play each other. And this is October 7th.
I'm so interested to see the Jimbo Petrino, how that meshes. Right, and I think we'll know pretty early when it comes down to that. I'm not worried about Alabama and anything meshing there. It's Nick Saban. He's going to have that thing rolling. You're obviously worried about Alabama's quarterback room. I just feel like Alabama, it's so weird when we talk about Alabama and we talk about such a negative light. Like even at SEC media days, is Saban's legacy in trouble? This and that. Won 11 games last year, man. Won 11 games. Was 2 plays away basically from making it to the playoff, right? And like we sit here and talk like, well, Alabama might go 8-4 or 9-3. I will be surprised if Alabama loses more than 1 game in the regular season. I will be surprised. And I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. It's still Alabama. That guy's still walking around on the sidelines. And I know it looked a little bit different from a defensive standpoint and a skill position standpoint last year. That's fine. They didn't have a number 1 draft pick at receiver. That blows my mind. I get it. One of the most penalized defenses in the country. I get it. That's not Nick Saban. But hell, you still won 11 games. It's like, oh, well, it's Bryce Young. Yeah, it's still Bryce Young. Well, hell, Saban recruited him, right? He's on Alabama for a reason. So if anything, I think Bama's going to whoop up on them, to be honest.
On Texas A&M?
Yeah, I think they're going to whoop up on them. I think
a little payback from a close game.
I think it's going to be. I'm interested to see what the spread will be. I mean, we'll know closest when they start opening the lines. But I think, if anything, I would take Bama 10.5.
All right, well, let's see what the quarterback situation is out there.
Let's see what the quarterback situation is at A&M.
Max Johnson.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Well, at both. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm specifically talking about at Texas A&M right now. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how both situations play out at the quarterback position. Booster Club, let us know which in-conference matchups will have the biggest impact on the college football playoff this season. College football is right around the corner, and I'll tell you what, I'm fired up about it. YouTube, thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and we'll catch you on the next one.